It's March 2015 at Canterbury Cathedral. And here she is, Elizabeth II, the face of the modern monarchy. She's here to unveil statues of herself and her husband, Prince Philip. Immortalised in stone next to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, in this, the year Elizabeth becomes the longest reigning monarch in British history. Though when she came into the world, nobody expected that. On April the 21st, 1926, a child was born to the Duke and Duchess of York, Elizabeth and Prince Albert, who was the second son of King George V. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary came into this world a princess. Her popular uncle, the Prince of Wales, was next in line to the throne, followed by her father. So no one ever expected that one day Elizabeth would become queen. And she certainly wasn't born in a palace. In fact, she was born right here. On Bruton Street in Mayfair, now a restaurant. A plaque is the only reminder that before the bombings of World War II, Elizabeth's home stood on this site. And here they are, the family at their home in 1927, and Nanny and baby Elizabeth. The young princess was expected to lead a relatively quiet life away from the full glare of the monarchy, which is just what people thought at the birth of another royal infant. Victoria was born in a palace, Kensington Palace, on May the 24th, 1819. At birth, she was fifth in line to the throne. And even though her mother was fiercely ambitious, no one could have known that Victoria was destined to become queen. She too was raised quietly, away from court, under the care of her strong-willed German mother, Victoria Maria Louisa, the Duchess of Kent. Here she is, Victoria.
Victoria herself. Victoria spent her childhood here in Kensington, and she said herself, "I had a very unhappy childhood." And she was also a long way from the throne. No one thought she'd ever come anywhere near it. Basically, when she was born, she was intended to be married into other royal families, a very minor royal, so no one thought anything much of it.
By her own account, Victoria was brought up very simply here in a suite of rooms on the first floor of Kensington Palace. It was a privileged but isolated existence.
What we do know is that she remembered later on this terrible, oppressive, melancholy childhood. We think it was a little bit more complex than that.
In what way?
Well, she was lonely, but she was also very imaginative. She had 132 dolls, and they're all very neatly and in a very organized way listed in her inventory, which she kept at the time.
She must have had a sort of very, big dream world, the way she played with these dolls. I suppose she had a lack of friends.
We wonder whether some of the costumes could possibly be made from fabrics that made Princess Victoria's dresses. That's not something we're able to prove, but it's a possibility.
Before she was one, her grandfather and father died. And when her uncle George IV passed away, another uncle became king, which meant she was next in line to the throne at the age of 11. Life became even more restrictive.
Her mother kept her under, well, pretty much lock and key. They called it the Kensington system. They wanted control of her, so they kept her under 24-hour surveillance. She wasn't allowed to have a single minute alone, because what they wanted was her to come to the throne at, say, 10, 12, and they be the one in the power. They be the one being regent.
She was sheltered and protected, and she even shared a bedroom with her mother until the day she became queen at the age of 18. In stark contrast, Elizabeth's early life was happy and carefree. She had the constant companionship of her younger sister, Princess Margaret, and her parents, a family who affectionately called themselves "We Four."
They had the common touch. They had ordinary Scottish nannies looking after their girls. When it was her birthday, Boba MacDonald taught her how to iron the wrapping paper of her presents and put it away in a drawer so that she could reuse it. But she went on the bus, she went to the museums, and all the time, in those early years, she was just being prepared for the life of a young lady of the middle to upper classes.
But all that changed suddenly in 1936. It was the year of the Three Kings. In January, King George V, Elizabeth's grandfather, died. Her uncle took the throne as King Edward VIII, but his reign lasted just 325 days. He abdicated in order to marry the twice-divorced American Wallis Simpson. By December that year, Elizabeth's father was king. Elizabeth moved here to Buckingham Palace with her family at the age of just 10. Her father was now king, and it must have been a huge change for the young princess, who until then had been raised in a more modest family home, albeit in Mayfair. It was 1937, exactly 100 years after Queen Victoria had arrived here at the age of 18. Victoria left Kensington Palace just weeks after becoming queen. Her first requests were for time alone at last away from her mother and a bedroom of her own. She got much more than that. Victoria became the first monarch to make Buckingham Palace her official residence. Over the years, she transformed the place, and visitors to this day are still met by the paintings of her nearest and dearest. How much did Queen Victoria change Buckingham Palace, and why?
Well, I think she wanted to make it a centre of court life, and court life, I think, of a very different sort. I mean, the thing about the monarchy in the middle of the Victorian period was that it became respectable for the first time. And really, this was a palace which was going to house a court which was the epitome of the kind of numerality of the family and of society.
Elizabeth has transformed this palace in another way. In 1962, she opened the Queen's Gallery to give the paying public access to the royal art collection. In 1993, she opened the doors even wider. Tens of thousands now take the chance to wander through the staterooms, with ticket and gift shop sales going towards the upkeep of the artworks and royal residences. This evening, 300 guests are invited to a reception at Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Award for Enterprise, now in its 50th year. And each guest is greeted personally.
It means a huge amount to these businesses. You could be in China, you could be in India and Brazil. People will see the emblem of these awards and they will know that you've got that because you're a very successful British business, and it actually then leads to more business, which is great news for Britain.
Such a boost to me personally, to my confidence as a businesswoman, but obviously to the business. I've met so many fantastic other businesses, so I look forward to a lot more business networking as well.
The questions she was asking tonight were quite interesting. They were very business orientated, and she obviously knows what's going on, which is great, you know.
The Queen herself is such an inspiration for all of us.
And so for women in general, I think, you know, I mean, an inspiration of hard work, dedication, you know, like what entrepreneurs should look up to.
Buckingham Palace, it's such an iconic building. It's hard to imagine that it hasn't always looked like this. But Queen Victoria wanted to extend the palace, and so she sold Brighton Pavilion to pay for it and added on this whole frontage, everything you can see now, including, of course, one of the most famous balconies in the world. Here's Victoria in 1893, first photographed on the balcony. And Elizabeth, her great-great-granddaughter, making her debut as a baby. Across time, the balcony became a sort of rallying point for the nation. No more so than in May 1945, when war in Europe ended and the crowds called for her father, George VI, as Elizabeth stood proudly by him in her uniform. Growing up during World War II shaped the future Queen. In 1940, she was the teenager who gave this radio broadcast for children forced to evacuate their homes.
My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
You would have thought that the royal family would have been moved a long way away to safety, but instead the princesses came here.
They lived here in Windsor Castle for much of the war, and the castle was stripped of all its finery. The paintings were removed and hidden in caves in Wales and other places. And it was a very much diminished castle, except for the magnificence of the buildings. There was a big air raid shelter built under one of the towers, which no one liked using, but they did when the air raid sirens sounded.
As the bombing raids of the Blitz hit, it was suggested that the princesses should be evacuated, to which the Queen Mother had an immediate reply.
She said, "The children would never leave without me. I would never leave without the king, and the king will never leave." Indeed, in September 1940, the king and queen were very nearly killed when a German bomber flew up the Mall and dropped its bombs directly on Buckingham Palace. They concealed how nearly they came to death. They realized instantly that they had to be the focal point of the nation at war. And that was transferred to Princess Elizabeth, and we have seen that ever since, duty is what has defined her and led her and inspired her.
Elizabeth, unlike Victoria, was able to learn the art of being a monarch from her parents. But both entered public life in the same way and in the same place, each showing their commitment to the armed forces. Queen Victoria came here to Windsor Castle to review her troops for the first time when she was just 18. A century later, Elizabeth, then still a princess, followed in her footsteps on her 16th birthday. It was her first official engagement.
The British Grenadiers then marched past Her Royal Highness the Kirk.
She's back. It's April 2015. Now 89, the Queen is presenting new colours to the 1st Battalion, the Welsh Guards. She knows the military inside out and played her part in the war effort when she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service at the age of 18.
One of the things she did was to learn how to strip down her truck. And there are famous pictures of her doing so. And she worked with other people who had been called up who were serving from all walks of life. And I think that was her first proper introduction to life outside of the family. And these were all sort of incremental steps in her training, if you like, towards being the monarch.
Her Majesty the Queen knows absolutely everything that's happening in the ceremonial state occasion, but she knows that I'm there to just make sure those people that don't know are led and guided so that they can give the best performance. I'm inspired by her, an absolutely wonderful lady.
I mean, the Queen is what we fight for and fight under for the country, and she's sort of the head of the army and our regiment, so it's extremely special for the boys.
Do you think that the Queen really does understand what you do, what you go through?
100%, 100%. I think she probably knows more than anyone in her time of understanding what sacrifice for the country is, and she's an extremely, extremely special person.
Recognition from the monarch has always been highly prized. At the end of the Crimean War in 1856, Queen Victoria introduced the Victoria Cross for bravery.